I know some of you, thank you, Julian. We are being recorded and live streamed on the city's YouTube channel. I am Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning for the city, as usual, chairing the CNI Neighborhood Task Force. And I think we have, this is, I believe, our fourth meeting of the Neighborhood Task Force. So some familiar faces. I don't think we need to go through introductions. We have a number of folks from the city and our consultant team here and the Housing Authority. But I'll go ahead and I think we can go ahead and share the presentation. Thank you, Matthew. And dive right in. So we're going to do a few things tonight. We have an hour and a half. It's never enough time, but first we want to start with sharing some of the results so far from the neighborhood survey. This is the survey that went out to folks living in the communities around the Hackup property, and I think we have in the 80 to 90 result range so far. We're going to go back into the early action activities. These are those projects that we're able to do with funding through our grant to start to improve the public realm even before the larger project breaks ground. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the beginnings of our design process here. The planning team has essentially completed the existing conditions analysis phase of this project. That culminated to a large degree in our workshops in September, the September 21st events. Several of you were at those events. Thank you for being there. And now we're moving into the, in earnest, we're moving into the design phase. And so Matthew is going to be able to share a little bit what that means. And what we're looking towards, we'll talk about it again, but we have a design charrette scheduled for November 21st. So I want everybody to keep that in mind. We'll send out a reminder, a calendar invite. That's going to be at Eastport United Methodist Church, right in the neighborhood. And we're going to have a lot of fun at that event because we're going to start getting into looking at the actual site and what's possible and how we can improve the neighborhood. So I'm excited for that event. Thanksgiving week, and hope for a big attendance at that. So at this point, I want to hand things over to Lauren from EJP, who is going to kind of walk us through the neighborhood survey and what we've seen so far. And feel free, if people have questions along the way. I think we're a small enough group, just feel free to ask them. You can raise your hand, I think, is maybe a good practice.
Yeah, definitely, that works. So hi everybody, I'm Lauren. I work with EJP Consulting Group, and we first put out the resident survey, which was specifically targeting Eastport Terrace Harbor House residents. But knowing that changes and developments that would happen in that one small development area affect the broader neighborhood, we wanted to compare and look at the entire Eastport neighborhood. And that's just looking at a broader target area to say, like, what are the commonalities for the residents of Eastport neighborhood versus the residents of Eastport Terrace Harbor House. So next slide. So we selected 14 questions from the Eastport Terrace Harbor House survey, so that were relevant to the broader Eastport neighborhood. And we looked at the overall comparison. So what are the values and through lines and the commonalities? But first, we also wanted to see who lives here and who would answer our questions. So as Eric said, we had around 80 to 90 participants in the survey, which gives us a good idea of very specific population, and just kind of a comparison to start off with. So 80% of those who answered our survey were homeowners, which is important for the later on. And all of the participants were English speakers and spoke English in their home. This was pretty similar to the Eastport Terrace Harbor House, as they all speak English in their home as well. And then looking at the race differences, there it's very pronounced. 98% of residents who live in who responded to the survey in Eastport Terrace Harbor House are Black or African American, while 94% of those who responded to the neighborhood survey are white. And then looking at these two graphs, we asked what do you like best about your neighborhood? And this was asked both the exact same question to both Eastport Terrace Harbor House residents and Eastport broader neighborhood residents. You can see that obviously housing affordability was a big thing about Eastport Terrace that residents really liked. And then comparatively, the neighborhood said that proximity to downtown was pretty overwhelmingly one of the top priorities there. But these little blue boxes represent the three things that both residents aligned on. So location, even though it was not at the top of Eastport Terrace Harbor House, it still was in the top 6, top 5. And then neighborhood conveniences and services, and sense of community, family history, kind of being rooted in the community, which was a big thing for both.
Just a quick note, for most of these questions, there were many more responses that were
Yes.
to participants. So what you're seeing are kind of the top 6. So that's, even if something comes in at the bottom of this group, it still means it was at the top of all of the other responses.
Right. So next we asked about desired neighborhood improvements. So this was, how can we make the neighborhood better? More effective public safety initiatives is in the top 3 in both. Eastport Terrace and Harbor House residents really emphasize access to services, the need for services and programs like activities for youth and social services and mental health services, those types of things. While the neighborhood really put more of an emphasis on programming and access. So like access to the waterfront and art and quality schools, parks and rec, that kind of thing. But overall, there are a lot of commonalities between these two. You can see all the blue boxes are all the alignments where the neighborhood and the residents of Eastport Terrace Harbor House both agreed that these are important things that we should focus on in the neighborhood. Services, public safety, public transit, parking, parks and rec, those are all very big things for both. And then more specifically, we looked at recreational features. So these are, like Eric said, we had a long list of all the different types of recreational features that were options. You can see that regular parks and events for all ages were pretty high on the residents list, or Eastport Terrace Harbor House. And then for the neighborhood, that's also in the middle there. So it's still in the top 5. And for us, we are looking at those commonalities, the things that we can focus on that bring the neighborhood revitalization together. So dock and water access and shared use path, those are things the neighborhood wants. Those are pretty low on the residents, but those are things that we can still elaborate on and see how we can give residents the access to that in every way. All right, you can go to the next one. And then this was a series of questions. I'm sorry, it's hard to see, but we asked in this question, if you we did a range from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So we did about 6 statements saying, my neighbors are willing to make working to make the neighborhood a better place. I feel included. People around here are willing to help their neighbors. It's very important for me to live in this neighborhood. I belong here. Those types of things and statements. And we basically gauged on a scale of, do you agree with this statement? And it kind of came back pretty surprising for the Eastport Terrace residents, saying largely neutral and very spread out across the board. But for neighborhood residents, you can see with that red and orangish color that they have a way larger percentage that agreed with those statements, that they do have a higher sense of belonging and consider Eastport a good place to live.
And this question, I think, is particularly what's particularly key to kind of understand this one and the other question. You know, we're sort of comparing homeowners to renters. I think that then drives a lot of perceptions and feelings, I think, that might be different between the housing authority residents and the larger community.
And then we asked about perception of safety. As noted in the preferred improvements, safety is a top priority in overall all of Eastport. A majority said that they feel, which is 55%, say that they feel very unsafe in the neighborhood at night. And 61% comparably in the neighborhood said that as well. So there's actually very much, they feel safe in the day. That's clear with the red and orange here and here. And then in the evening, there's a more feeling of unsafe. I don't know how you would say that, but like, they don't feel as safe here in the evening. And neighborhood on the next slide tended to have a more, perceive a higher frequency of crime, which definitely could relate to the more feeling of being unsafe at night. 53% said that crime occurs daily or frequently in the neighborhood, while only 39% of Eastport Terrace Harbor House residents said daily or frequently crime.
Excuse me. Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
Go for it.
Was that broken down by crime, the actual crime committed, or did you just generally say crime?
This was a general question of crime, so we did not specify type.
Okay. Interesting that 53% of the neighborhood would say that they don't, or that the perception of crime is much higher as opposed to the 39% of the community that actually has a higher concentration of crime.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
All right, and then our last question was about transportation and how people get around. One of the surprising aspects or unsurprising aspects was that a lot of Eastport Terrace Harbor House residents do not use their own personal vehicle. There's a good distribution of residents that either use public transportation, walk, ride with someone else, or use their own car or vehicle. While in the neighborhood, there's 66% that all the time use their own car. And in comparison, the public transit, 77% of neighborhood never use public transportation, while 30% of residents always use transportation. So there's definitely a gap between those two. And then another interesting fact was that walking is a pretty prominent and a frequent way of getting around for both Eastport Terrace residents and neighborhood residents, as they both said that they walk over 50% of the time, either frequently or all the time or sometimes, which is really good. And it means that we need to make walkability and pedestrian friendly streets a priority. All right, so I think that's the end of our neighborhood survey results. So if there are any questions,
yeah,
open
that's
up
a
the floor
good
now.
time if folks have any thoughts. Chanel, go for it.
I might have missed it. I'm sorry. What was the demographic of and the percentage of folks that were renters versus folks that were homeowners. And when I say demographic, if you have it, the racial demographic of the folks that took the survey.
The first slide, I think, had a breakdown. Let's see.
The one before this. Yeah. So 8% of the people that responded to the neighborhood survey were renters.
And we should just add that for the Eastport Terrace Harbor House, that's 100% that's renters. So that's it's the exact opposite on both ends. And I think on the racial demographic, if you flip to the next slide, that shows the racial makeup, the reverse is also true, that the Harbor House Eastport Terrace, that population is predominantly Black. And on the neighborhood survey, folks are self-reporting as white.
So 98%. So, okay, so the majority of the people that responded were of African descent homeowners. Am I interpreting that right?
Oh, no.
Not in Eastport Terrace Harbor House.
Okay.
What you're not seeing here, and this is just from the survey that was, we know that all the residents at Eastport Terrace and Harbor House are renters just by nature of the existing housing there. So yeah, when you see that ETHH, they're 100% renters. We're also 98% Black. But
I'm so sorry, and I know there's a lot of people on the call, and maybe I'm a minority here. So how many people took the survey? Like, what was the percentage of people who from the renters, right, that took the survey? You said it was only what are the percentage?
you mean the percentage of the number of residents from Eastport Terrace and Harbor House who participated in the survey? Is that what you're saying? Was that?
Oh, 0. So this was just the neighborhood survey.
Oh, I see.
That we're presenting on now, but the comparison, so the ETHH, that's the original resident survey where we had 292. Well, sorry, we had around
203. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Sorry, we had 70% pretty much of the Eastport Terrace Harbor House residents respond to that survey.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And just to add, and I think, I'm sorry, Laura may have already said this, but the resident survey for Eastport Terrace Harbor House was much more extensive. There were about, I think, 70 questions. So it was digging into a lot of issues, but we were able to pull out comparable questions to survey the broader neighborhood. That's these 14 questions that that Lauren just went over. It's just smaller subset.
Bill, you have a question?
I did. Eric, in the neighborhood survey, I think you said you had about 90 participants, something like that. And was that the immediate neighborhood? I mean, it didn't seem to be any geographical boundaries to the neighborhood, so that people in Eastport could have been filling out this survey and they could have lived across the street from Harbor House, or they could have lived down on Horn Point, about a mile away. And was there any consideration for differences in that type of location? I could see people having very different answers depending on literally where you live in relation to Harbor House and Eastport Terrace.
I mean, that's a good point. I don't think there was that definition. I think that people could have responded in that range.
So Eric, let me just clarify actually, because there was a screening question, the first screening question.
Okay.
That, Lauren, if we scroll the PowerPoint back, there is a slide that showed you, I think it's the first one, I don't know who's scrolling this, but we did ask folks to identify for the neighborhood survey, do you live in the neighborhood now? do you work in the neighborhood? Or do you have some other, are you a property owner, but you don't live in the neighborhood? So if you see this first slide here, this was meant to screen out folks who were from far afield. So you had, in order to continue with the survey, Bill, you had to identify with one of these particular screening questions.
Plus, we did provide a map of the neighborhood. And Matthew, I don't know if you have that as well, but we have a boundary that
Inside of the
put in.
survey, so
Yeah,
you,
Yes.
that when you got asked that question, you would see the boundary that we're asking you to say, do you live anywhere in here, work anywhere in here, or have
Mhm.
some relationship? Because we were worried, we wouldn't want survey results from folks just randomly everywhere in Annapolis that may.
Right,
skew
right,
it.
right. So then they would have had to look at the map,
Correct,
understand the boundary,
correct,
and then understand that if they're answering this, they need to be within the boundary.
correct.
Okay.
But thanks for asking that question, because it was an important screening question for us to make sure we could really do some comparisons.
Okay, thank you.
And Eric, looks like Chantel's hand is still up. I don't know if it's an
Oh,
old hand or a new hand.
Let me unraise it.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
thank you. Well, let's go on to the next section of the presentation, and we can always come back if somebody has another thought. So this, I see, Mike, you have this question about the survey. The survey was available in Spanish. There was a drop down. You basically had to indicate on the survey if you wanted it in English or if you wanted it in Spanish. And I don't, so we didn't get anybody taking it in Spanish, but it was made available that way. So early action activities. We've talked about this in past meetings. I'm going to just kind of remind folks how this program is set up. And this is a flyer that we had at the community workshops on the 20th and 21st, just to explain how HUD identifies early action activities. Just in a nutshell, these are projects, we have about $100,000 to put towards projects that can be implemented in the short term, essentially give people some something to look forward to, something that improves the community in the near future, and basically helps to build some momentum for this project. So these projects, I think it was Jane maybe at the last meeting, basically said, so in essence, we need to find projects that can kind of be implemented quickly, but have a big bang for the buck. And that's exactly right. We in terms of time frame, we need to get, actually, you can go to the next slide. We need to get HUD's approval of these projects before we can move forward with anything. That means that HUD will look at whether they fall into one of these, the group of projects that the funds can be used for. And, they're also looking for the impact they're going to have. And we surveyed folks at the community workshops. We gathered, and we've talked about this as well in the past meetings, but we've gathered ideas together, and we want to try to drill down a little bit to some specific projects tonight, and that we can kind of try to refine more, and at the next meeting come back with something that's much more specific. But one of the other things to keep in mind is that we have to do an environmental assessment. It's in some cases it may require an outside consultant to sort of evaluate the project and its impacts. And that's something that will take a little bit of time as well. And so we're going to be sort of gauging projects from that perspective, just to ensure that we can actually do them in a timely fashion. But the other key thing to keep in mind is HUD really doesn't want projects that are going to just be things that we should be doing anyways, routine infrastructure, the things that the city, for example, already does in terms of sidewalks or roadway paving. But there's a whole range of other projects that might address streetscape conditions, but also add an element of placemaking, pride of place, identity building, and also improve safety and do other things that some of the other basic infrastructure might be addressing. So that's something to keep in mind. Looks like Paul, you have your hand up? Go for it.
I do. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. Just a quick question about this, the way the money is spent. Is it necessary? Is it proximate to HACA, or is it, does some of the money have to be spent for activities on HACA, or can all of it be spent nearby? I mean, how does the agency sort of direct you in that regard, if at all?
Does someone for Ray or Maggie, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. It has to be spent within the Eastport target neighborhood, which is the neighborhood map that was in the survey, if you took the survey. The only other thing is that it has to be something physical, and you can see here what it can be spent for, what it cannot be spent for. So it cannot be spent on services or programs. It does need to be a sort of physical, visual change to the neighborhood, but just somewhere within the target neighborhood.
And Paul, I should add that it has to be able to be completed and the funds spent by November of next year.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
We can definitely have multiple projects too. That's something to keep in mind. I mean, it's a good chunk of change that for some of these projects, we may be able to use all of it. So I think you can go to the next slide, Matthew. So the projects that we've heard about so far, they really fit into these three categories: streetscape / placemaking, paths, green space, outdoor education, and facade improvements. And with the facade improvement, I do want to say that one of the other challenges with that, this idea is basically to give out small grants to make cosmetic changes to buildings in the neighborhood. We could define what types of buildings and so forth, but I think for this type of program to be done effectively, it typically needs an organization that can manage the funds and be sort of an agent, and that's going to be challenging in this. We don't have an organization set up to do that very easily. Well, that kind of program, I think, has been done in other places in similar contexts. It may be more challenging to do here, but the other two would be more straightforward. Alderman Gay, go for it.
Thanks, Eric. So who would be managing the funds in any other case or scenario?
So Eric, I can take that.
Go for it.
So Alderman Gay, the funds, the housing authority would be the fiscal agent for the funds. So we have $100,000 so that we're clear that's available. We would submit proposals. Once we agree on the list, we would submit proposals to HUD. And if HUD approves those projects, then those funds are then released by the housing authority based upon submitted invoices. And there are a lot of, I'm summarizing very, very high level here. There'll be contracts that get negotiated with whomever the lead entity is responsible for executing on that project. So let's use hypothetically a facade improvement program like Eric talked about, because we've done this in other places. There would be an entity, let's say a nonprofit or a city department that's managing that project. There'd be a contract between them and this housing authority that says, we're going to do 50 homes over the next 6 months. And here's the details on what's going to happen. All of that goes into the proposal to HUD. And the housing authority, then once HUD approves the program, then invoices come to the housing authority. Then the housing authority then submits draw requests to HUD. The housing authority won't just have $100,000 sitting in its piggy bank. It would still have to draw them from HUD. So I know that's a lot in a tiny space to tell you, but housing authority fiscal agent, the funds are available but not released until HUD has approved the detailed proposals that we now have to get to in the next phase of this work.
No, that makes perfect sense. I just wanted, I just was maybe misunderstanding if someone would be managing separately if it was only the facade improvement program. So thank you.
Yeah, and there can be more, like Eric said, there could be multiple projects. So depending on the number of projects, each of those would have a lead entity responsible and a budget and a schedule and the details. But good question.
So I think at this point, we want to shift over to this. We prepared a map to try to kind of summarize what we've heard so far on these. I'm gonna actually share my screen. So this should be a familiar view to everybody on the call. We're looking at the Housing Authority's site. It's kind of highlighted here: Harbor House, Eastport Terrace. We've highlighted President Street, our main drag through the neighborhood. We have Madison Street from President to Bay Ridge. We've highlighted some key intersections that have been mentioned on previous calls and in the recommendations we've received. We're summarizing everything on the right side, by the way, in terms of what we've heard so far. We've highlighted Hawkins Cove, which is a project that the city and Housing Authority have already identified as a high need and have found funding separately to do improvement project and improve the connection to Truxton Park. And then we're also highlighting the green space at the corner of President and Madison in front of the Harbor House sign, or around that sign. So, I mean, at this point, and I just want to, everybody can kind of refer to the list on the right. Some of these are very specific to places, to locations. Some are more general, like the murals. Melissa from the Housing Authorities told us that they get a lot of requests for murals, and there are some specific locations like the side of the Eastport Community Center that have sort of been discussed in the past. But I did want to open it up to a discussion at this point, and try to get to some consensus on projects that, again, can really be implemented in the time frame we have and have a good impact and really address a need. So I should also add, part of the reason why the Madison and President intersection is getting a bigger circle is that's just been talked about a lot, and as a major crossroads for the community, in a place where it doesn't really have adequate crosswalks right now. It's a place where people wait for the bus. It's doing a lot of things right now, and it's still a pretty basic intersection. So anyhow, does somebody want to chime in here with something that matters a lot to them in terms of what how we use this early action funds. Mike.
Eric, just give us all a little bit of perspective on the time frame here. I know a lot of times you can make improvements as part of a big project like this, and then basically have them bulldozed when the real project starts. If we make improvements at the corner of President and Madison, how long are we talking they're going to be in effect before real construction starts and they might go away?
Great question. I would like to defer to EJP or Matthew.
I can take that. So I think, Michael, you're absolutely right. If all things are equal, right, then the idea would be to prioritize things that have a longer shelf life, right? But we are, in terms of the trajectory and the timeline, we are a good 2 years before, and that's, an aggressive schedule that we would even see shovels in the ground. And it could be longer than that because we still have another year to go in planning. Between now and the end of the year, we would have brought on a developer that will be helping the housing authority execute on the housing plan. Then you've got to go through another period of pre-development to get to your first phase. So if we were going to, just let's take the murals, for example, in an ideal setting, those would then go into an area that would not be the first buildings to come down, right? Because this is going to be a phased effort. But your point is very well taken. Those are some of the things that we're balancing in terms of the kinds of investments that we would spend this money on. So you're not, something pretty today, and then in 6 months, they're gone.
Or in the case of Hawkins Cove, where, there are plans to do a more dramatic improvement to that site. I think in the short term, we could certainly improve that path to Truxton Park. We could put furnishings that make that site more usable. We could protect the water's edge so it's not a hazard. We could certainly do some things at Hawkins Cove that would not conflict with a larger project.
And remember, because these are investments that can happen anywhere in the neighborhood, not just on the public housing footprint, right? We have some choices about, where these investments can go. Or that even if they are physical and the space may eventually get demolished, are these things that could move later on and have a second iteration later on.
Alderman Gay.
Thank you so much, Eric. Just quickly, if you could go back to the slide for reference that had the uses for the funding. I think it was 2 slides back. I just asked that because let me just see, vacant properties, beautification, owner occupied building facades. Okay, yeah. I just asked that because a lot of the projects on the slide that we were just looking at look like capital improvement projects to me, where we could be using city funding to take care of those things. You mentioned the murals. We have $257,000 in arts and public places for public murals. They have been dying to do a mural. And heck, I feel like their existing funding sources that could take care of some of the, other projects. I feel like when special money like this comes available, it should be used for quality of life improvements. So maybe that'd be recreation, the facade idea. I'm kind of opposed to community gardens because maintenance is always a huge thing and they end up falling apart in 4 months. But, just things that would improve the residents' quality of life. The list that you had, the first 2 things are something that could be added to a capital improvement project request to be taken care of in a year or 2, as well as the sidewalks, etc. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. This map, without any other information, it does appear to kind of highlight things that would be in our capital improvement program. And yes, our Art and Public Places Commission does have a larger pot of money to draw from now. And so, I mean, one area that I think kind of falls into what you're talking about from a quality of life perspective is, you know, the green space that's near the intersection of Madison and President. I mean, to the extent that we have an opportunity to create a kind of park, improved park environment where people can gather, where events can happen. There was interest in a fresh foods, a farmer's market type venue. I mean, that might be more in line with what you're talking about. You know, just the idea of starting to build a quality public space, you know, that's not, that seems really deliberate, maybe is something I think about.
And Eric, if I just add, you know, one of the things that Councilman made me just remember, we've got to think about, you know, for any of the items that we're investing this money on, there's an assumption that some of those costs get leveraged from, you know, some of the source, right? So to the extent that I'm glad you talked about the $257,000 that's available right now in the Arts and Public Space Initiative, because we would expect to leverage some of those funds, given some of the themes that are on this list already, that they would, the funding would be supplemented by some of those city sources. So thank you for raising that, because it gives me an opportunity to clarify the need that some local money would get leveraged for executing on some of these projects that are not the tiny ones that a resident might need or something. So thanks.
Bill?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I guess I have a question and then a comment about this. The question is, you said that whatever it is that's decided to do here needs to be completed by November of next year.
I think the
Is
rate,
that right?
correct me, but I think it may just be that the money has to be
Expended.
and expended, right? So the project could still be in progress, but we have to have a contract in place to use the funding.
Right.
All right,
And
so
that's because, Bill, these are use it or lose it monies. If we don't use these funds, HUD will take them back. So
okay, so I understand that to mean it has to be contractually obligated, but
No.
not necessarily implemented
no,
within a year. Is that correct? I mean,
no, it needs to be spent.
oh,
So
so you need to pay for something even before you get it.
no,
What
so
you're
the
saying is it
idea-
may not be completed by November, but you got to pay for it before
well, in
that.
an ideal way, Bill, we want projects that can be completed by then. So
That's
that,
what, yeah,
ideally
I
done
see.
by then. But if there was a project, for example, that had a tail that straddled beyond November of next year, that would not be prohibitive if the elements that we use to pay for these federal dollars were on the front end.
Okay,
And other monies came in and picked up the tail end.
okay.
So does that help?
It does. Thank you for clarifying that. My thought would be that, you know, as Eric had said, that you probably wouldn't pick projects that had primary responsibility for the city, and Alderman Gay commented on that as well. And as I look at this list, 3/4 of this list I would personally categorize as things the city should be doing or would have responsibility for. My suggestion would be that this intersection, first of all, seems to coalesce on a number of people's thoughts here. It is kind of a gateway area. It's a green space. It could incorporate a project that had different elements. So, for example, very intrigued by the farmers market idea, even though that would required a third party involvement to actually do a farmer's market, the ability to have a place for it is very attractive. Those things really, when they take off, they take off, and there's certainly a need. It's an intersection which has safety and crosswalk concerns. And safety was a major, one of the top concerns in the broad sense of the survey from people who lived there and lived in the abutting neighborhood. And if you consider traffic management, like speeding and safety getting across the street as an element, it certainly would be helpful to do some of that kind of planning there. And in terms of green space, you not only have the green space that already exists, but you can do some, you theoretically could do some attractive traffic calming bump outs and things like that where you do plantings. Some may argue, well, the city should be doing that anyway in capital improvement, but I'm telling you from Eastport, it took us 2.5 years to get a simple bump out across from the bakery. It still isn't up yet, but we've agreed to put in plantings. Hopefully that wouldn't take that long there, but you can do some pretty creative things. So you can do about 3 or 4 things right in there. So my comment would be, think about that. Think about where's the consensus going? Where did a lot of people see a need? And what are 3 or 4 things that we could do there? Yeah,
We could probably come back at the next meeting with try to flesh out some ideas, in between now and then. And I mean, the way you refer to it as a gateway, I think is really accurate. And it is an important gateway to this area. Randy, you have a comment. I want Melissa put her hand out. Did you want to respond to Bill, Melissa? Or? You're on mute.
I'll let Randy comment.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, I was just gonna say that one thing, and I always bring this up, possibly looking at contract some type, do you all plan to put in some kind of preference for minority-owned contractors to perform some of these works, or even for some of the projects for funding? And then also, if you're asking this level of detail with the project scopes and the details, that's asking for a pretty, a level of capacity that just may not, that is not prevalent or the norm in some of these communities, that you may want to feel ownership in some of these projects as they roll out. And then also that preference for minority-owned contractors will also really break up a lot of these historical and traditional monopolies that have historically been capitalizing on the funds that come down, whether it be through these types of projects or others, funding sources, and make it hard for those that are maybe new or don't have or lack capacity in that regard. So this is something I was thinking about, possibly doing some kind of training or training series that would look to help residents or citizens in the area, or even a group of minority-owned contractors and entrepreneurs to help them come up with projects and drive their concepts. May also be something to think about as well.
That's a great point. I feel like if we did have to contract as part of a project, we probably would be following whatever guidelines HUD has in place. Would that be accurate?
Yes. So we have to offer those types of preferences for minority contractors.
But can I clarify something though, Melissa, because there's sort of 2 dimensions to that question that he's raised. One is sort of the longer term implementation and the opportunities that come with the bigger redevelopment opportunity. versus the right now, these smaller tactical projects that need to get moved on, some of which may just be a couple of thousands of dollars. Because the maximum amount of money that's available right now is $100,000. And so part of what, as we think through this list, is who is well positioned right now to be able to cause any of these things that we agree on to be completed by next year. So I wanted to just separate the conversation between these smaller projects that are a now issue and then the bigger opportunities that are coming.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of separate or kind of take this opportunity to prevent us from doing what traditionally happens in these types of activities. And that is that a lot of times, funds and resources often are meant to be spent in to build capacity and quality of life for some of these targeted communities and audiences, but they tend to get soaked up by some of the other processes in the mix of that. So a few ways to kind of alleviate that is definitely figuring out some kind of language towards some kind of preference and for minority-owned contractors around green and blue infrastructure development, and then also looking at how you can actually even take this, again, great opportunity here to train up a new group of stewards and environmental businesses and entrepreneurs that can help to alleviate some of these great infrastructure problems that exist. And then in the chat, I put a link to Eckington Park. If anyone has not heard of that or been there, I would definitely suggest you go and visit there. It's in DC. And honestly, when I got to the site, I immediately thought about something like that in our city, right even in the Eastport or even in Harbor House or Eastport Terrace kind of outskirts or inskirts. But that's the kind of vision I see when it comes to the level of quality that you want this kind of funds to really have an in-depth impact on the community, as well as recognizing, the legacy in the local areas.
I think those are great ideas, Randy, and something that we need to definitely think about and incorporate in these early action ideas, along with when there are larger contractors that we do hire on for various aspects of this project. They will definitely have to include training programs, job opportunities, large and small, for participation. And that's actually one of the qualifying things that we assess when we do evaluations of who we hire for this project. So whether it's a large project, medium, or small, that should definitely be a focus. One of the things that I did want to mention and encourage everyone to think about is that whatever idea or project that we come up with for the early action activity, we want it to be something that sort of sets the stage for the entire project and shows that the community is unified and supportive of this project, and something that will be permanent going forward. So if you're thinking about large scale changes for the community, we are going to have a very comprehensive revitalization plan. So along with that will be significant changes to the layout of the community. And so we don't have to worry about all the changes that need to happen at this point. This is more so that initial welcome to this project, and it sort of sets the stage for the changes that are to come. So we want it to be something that is small, impactful, and permanent, and doesn't need any adjusting when we do the overall revitalization of the project.
And
Oh,
I'm sorry, one last thing. Let me get this out. I just thought of this. Also, there's a lot of money coming as well through the Maryland Conservation Finance Act 2022. If you all haven't looked into that, Eric, it's got a lot of opportunities there that may also couple with what you're doing here. Suzanne Dorsey and the Blue and Green Infrastructure Advisory Legislation and Policy Commission that they just created is for this type of work to incentivize this kind of work and advance some of these kind of environmental outcomes.
I need to look into that more, Randy. Thank you for the heads up. Paul, you're can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, my mic doesn't work very. Can you hear me?
Yep.
yes.
Okay, sorry, my mic's not working too well. Just a couple, or really one sort of primary comment, and that is sort of the approach that's looks like it's being taken here, and I may disagree a little bit with Alderman Gay and even Ms. Maddox Evans on this. My thought is that, you know, in projects like this, often you get tied up in the big stuff and you overlook the little stuff, the little victories along the way that are necessary to ensure community involvement, community appreciation of the project, community understanding of the project. And to that extent, you know, even though there's city money available for murals, for example, it's there, but it hasn't been used. It may not be used. There are probably political issues along the way that have stopped it from being used. So, you know, it might not be a bad idea to look at some small victories, like a couple of murals, things like that, to get this thing rolling and rolling quickly, and get buy-in from the local community, because everyone's going to ask questions. Where's this money coming from? What's going on here? You can even incorporate project visuals in it. So I would suggest you sort of maybe look at some small stuff and some big stuff as you move forward. Thank you very much.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Eric, I just was going to say quickly, just acknowledging Karen Jennings has had a couple good ideas in the chat, and we do see them. And she mentioned our discussion about Sherritt Square at a few of our past meetings. And I think, just so you know, Karen, that is part of these streetscape and placemaking ideas. We've just condensed and summarized up, but definitely that sort of visual image of Sherritt Square is one that is still, I think, very clearly part of what we're maybe even thinking about for that intersection. So just so you know, we didn't specifically name it, but that concept is part of what we're talking about now.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in to maybe what Paul was referencing and stuff in the chat, that there are, I guess, what we call tactical urbanism strategies. I think, Eric, you may have presented some early on at a neighborhood meeting, but they're really designed to be quick and very high, with a lot of high visibility to get people excited. I know New York City DOT uses it early on in their kind of strategies to improve complete streets. And so they'll go out with, you know, very simple materials, paint, planters, things of that nature, to really help reinforce an idea behind the pedestrian realm. And when that takes off and becomes more accepted and celebrated, then they really move into kind of strategic thinking about that complete street strategy, you know, bringing in the curbs, because once you move a curb, there's a lot of infrastructure involved, and the price tag goes up really fast. And so that's why a lot of complete streets projects take a long time to get implemented. But you can look at these tactical strategies of simple things of paint and planting and public art to really get people excited and energized, and to help reinforce like a long-term vision. And some of these projects can actually bring people together as they invest their time to kind of think about a vision of a project. You know, a mural can incorporate the artist with the community and really bring people together to fulfill that vision, and use that, if we can use that strategically, to also educate people about the redevelopment opportunities here and the long-term vision for this reinvestment.
Thanks for that, Matthew. I mean, yeah, if folks were on the call, I guess it was back in August, I did share a bunch of examples of just how other places are doing this work in nimble ways to really build interest, and I follow a lot of these ideas that are being implemented in other places. But Mike's got his hand up. I just want to say quickly that I want to basically be able to move on around 7:40 to the last part of the presentation, but I feel like there's a lot of coalescing around this Madison and President intersection. At least it could address a lot of different things. I think we probably owe it to the group to kind of come back and look at it in, finer grain. But go ahead, Mike.
And there's nothing to say, Eric and Matthew, that if the $100,000 from HUD goes to the artsy or green part of this, that the city can't also put some funds towards creating that complete street towards the shopping center, right? The $100,000 can be used for a really cool intersection with plantings and a farmer's market. And then the city can come in and say, hey, if we're going to put $100,000 here, we're also going to do some work on completing this down to the shopping center. So if we decide that this intersection is the touchstone project, then the pressure then comes, we're getting $100,000 from HUD. Let's also get $250,000 from the city to complete this project, or from corporate investments, or small business people who are committing to, let's extend this further than just this intersection, but let's use the HUD funds for that.
Solid point. Alderman, go for it.
Thanks very much. I would agree with Mike. And first off, this has been great dialogue. But yeah, I would agree with Mike that, and the rest of the group, that intersection probably is, just because it is the 6 and 8 intersection as it relates to the wards, it serves importance. Also, the only corridor to any sort of business or food supply for the area. I think that on the point of creating some sort of open air food stall or market for gathering is incredibly important, considering that, Eastport has been, one of 4 food deserts in the county for decades. And at the rate of development, I don't see any strong possibility of that changing within the next 5 years at least. And so a project like that would, at the end of the day, benefit the quality of life for the residents who do need an opportunity, to have green food and just access to supplies in general. And then also to piggyback off of what he said, there's been constant interest from our partners from Chop Tank, who actually run and manage a farm, the Atlas farm in Baltimore, and they've expressed interest in partnering for some sort of food market. And so just really cool possibilities could exist there. And I think at the end of the day would benefit the residents.
Also great points. I think there's a lot that could be leveraged here. So I think what we should do, the planning team, I think, should take a closer look at that intersection and some of the adjacent spaces, and basically try to identify what would make sense, not necessarily design anything, but just, does that make sense, Matthew? Just to kind of be able to come back and with a finer grain understanding of what realistically what we could do at that intersection. I see transit, Alderman just mentioned, there's a bus stop at that intersection that you don't really notice, but you see people waiting for the bus. I feel like there's a lot of things that we could probably pull out.
It's a bus stop for all the schools except for one, as well as public bus stop.
I do want to go back to the presentation and have Matthew talk about the kind of how we're moving into the design phase of this project. So kind of switching gears here.
Sure. And Eric, to follow up, I mean, we could come back to the next neighborhood meeting, and I feel like there's some consensus here, unless somebody really has a strong opinion about other locations or other strategies to be implemented here. But it seems like there's a strong consensus built around the Madison and President intersection, and how that could be a stepping stone for greater, more strategic thinking of not only the redevelopment, but also how one might envision President Street in the long term and Madison Street in the long term to make stronger pedestrian connections. So yeah, we could kind of maybe develop some boards, some visual boards of ideas that could be implemented in that area. But also, I'm just gonna get to it as well. But November 21st, we're gonna have a design charrette, and so we won't get to the detail in the design charrette necessarily about the intersection, but I think if you keep that in mind, it can help shape the way you think maybe about the larger development. So let me see if I can find my slides. Hold on just one second. I just lost it.
And I'll just add, Matthew, while you're looking for your slides, that I think when we come back with some ideas, we'll also maybe have some preliminary cost estimates. So we know, so we don't have a whole, array of 50 things and it's going to cost $2 million. So we can get a sense of that.
Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. Is it big enough for everybody? Should I go to, I'm afraid to hit presentation mode because it's going to take me all the way to the beginning. So let me just flip through real fast. So here we go. The redevelopment housing program. I'm going to be really brief because I want everybody to come back in November 21st and have a really good animated conversation about what's going to happen here. What I want to do is quickly just talk about some design or development principles that we currently have. So I think as we start to look at the site, we want to avoid building on environmentally sensitive land. We don't really have a floodplain, but nor do we have wetlands, but we do have some steep slopes that lead down to the waterfront. And so I think it would be smart of us to leverage that ecological benefit on the site for future generations, and this current generation to utilize as a good environmental filter for the Chesapeake Bay. I think when we get into planning and design, we want to think about how the buildings lay out. I think we had some comments and some ideas at the existing conditions meetings that we had that talked about how the site design perhaps leads to unfavorable conditions in terms of how people interact in those spaces, because there's not eyes in those spaces and less desirable activities happen there. So we want to maybe think about how we can do better with this redevelopment to organize buildings, improve the public realm, the street realm, the public spaces, make them feel like there's always eyes in those spaces so people feel safe and comfortable there, and can help maybe bring both the residents together with the larger neighborhood. So how do we find common spaces that people can share and take ownership and pride of? Again, creating those connections with the larger neighborhood. Where possible, we want to build this is going to be a multi-phase project, so we want to find places where we can build first. And I'm just going to let that thought segue into another thought that while I'm not going to present it here formally in this presentation, we are still looking at opportunities offsite outside of the Eastport Terrace Harbor House location for other housing opportunities to help people maybe have to relocate on a short term or even long term, but finding opportunities where we can build first or house people without having to really demolish buildings from the get-go. We also want this to be, market viable and financially feasible. So, we're leveraging the market study that we've had taken place. And we'll, as Ray pointed out earlier, we're going to be working with a developer that gets procured to really get into the nuts and bolts of how this is going to be financially feasible moving forward. So I'm going to start with some of the non-residential program. We've kind of taken a collection of what's there today and some elements that are not there today, but what people want to have. And so we started to create kind of a spreadsheet or a listing here of those programs. We did hear early education is important, and we should give credit to, I guess, to HACA right now to trying to leverage the opportunity that they're looking at with the YMCA to bring early education, a Head Start program, to this neighborhood, to the site, even on, as an early phase before anything else happens with the community, and trying to locate that program there. But we want to provide space for them to grow. So that 6,600 gross square feet represents a early education space that can meet the needs that they have now, but also grow to support additional classes and both after and before school enrichment, which would be a great benefit for the residents in the neighborhood. We looked at the existing community center, looking at some of the programs there, some of the key programs. We want to try to preserve some of the fitness and gym program that's there, but also the things that you don't typically see, the community rooms and the staff offices behind the scenes. And of course, if you were, I guess I'll just make a joke, but if you were at the last community meetings that we had, we want to find a room that has great acoustics for meetings. I think that would be a great qualitative element to add into this non-residential program. Residential services. So with the redevelopment, we'll look at office spaces, but the development will be done by a private developer in coordination with HACA, but that private development team is going to need some of their space. So this is trying to carve out, leasing space for them, on-site maintenance, and then of course, for those who are participating in the People Task Force, we want to find a partner that can provide supportive services locally, and so carving out some spaces, some office spaces there for those uses, right there in the neighborhood. And then of course, HACA has their headquarters there. We want to be able to provide them spaces. So the HACA offices there, the offices, the workrooms, and their facilities management team has a place there on the site. And then last but not least, we heard that people would like, it was mentioned earlier, the food desert, but also we may not be able to get a large grocery store, but we want to be able to provide perhaps something convenient, something of small format, kind of food shop that we can get there. And so just giving a flexible range of retail space from 800 up to 5,000 gross square feet, depending on what the market can bear in this area, but using that as a kind of a tool. And of course, the open spaces, there's a lot of open spaces there. Some of them are not totally being used on site today, but these are a lot of the spaces that we heard from the previous community meetings. Of course, playgrounds, we heard that loud and clear from the young planners workshop that we hosted, that's an important element. We heard the pool is important. Some of these elements were a part of the surveys that people responded to. So those elements are kind of rising up, and they'll be a part of the program that we'll use to at the design charrette in November. I guess it is November now, but later in November to help us look at how do we shape the site. I didn't want to get into the details of the housing program, but I just want to stress the housing goal. So, and we've seen this slide before. The goal here is 1-for-1 replacement housing. So every unit that's there today, we want to replace it on site. And then we want to make this a mixed income community. So we want to create a range of different people in the community to help balance the community. And so we're looking at approximately 358 dwelling units at a minimum for the mixed income community program. And of course, we want to make this a high quality design. So there's no distinction between what is market rate or a deeply subsidized unit. It should all look like market rate housing in this community and fit into the local context. So next steps, I kind of gave you some food for thought about what we're going to be playing with. So at the design shred in November, we want you to participate with us. We want to make this as easy for participants to design ideas about the redevelopment site. We're looking forward to building out a lot of these program pieces so people can actually manipulate, push, pull, have conversations about priorities, where certain building types might go. If you are part of the housing task force, we talked about density. We want to give you some tools of housing types from low density to kind of higher density, 4-story buildings with elevators down to kind of townhouse type units and more. If there's ideas, we can definitely try to accommodate that in the design shred process. But we're working right now to provide all the tools you'll need to be an urban planning team at the design shred without having to have to draw a picture or a plan. We want to make this as easy as possible for everyone to feel comfortable and give us their ideas about what the future is for the Eastport Terrace Harbor House site. So with that, I'll open up the floor to some questions if anybody has questions.
Yeah,
There's a lot of questions in the chat. Actually, I'm flying in, Matthew. And
Oh,
maybe
okay.
quickly grab them. So Jess Hackler, you and Melissa, I think probably answered this, but you were saying programming, is it strictly for Hacker residents, for all residents of the neighborhood? And I think, as Melissa pointed out, not just early Head Start, but the idea would be to have, community-based service space on site that could be used by residents and the neighborhood, the surrounding, neighborhood members. And then there was another one, Jess, that you had about grocery store on Hacker property. And I think Matthew, the idea is no, not a grocery store on the property, but to have some retail space planned that could be programmed and built out later, depending on the types of vendors. But Matthew, do you want to just discuss a little bit more about the actual, what we're talking about food and potentially small, what did we call it? We didn't call it a grocery store. We had another word for it.
Yeah, we I guess
Market,
we were trying to, yeah,
a food mart,
yeah,
or something like that.
something that can provide daily essentials for people, like milk or bread or something to that effect, without having people have to jump on the bus, which it doesn't take a lot of time to get there, but the hours are not as frequent as one would like with transit. So trying to find the right size service provider to kind of fit into that area. Grocery stores, we're kind of shying away from that because they come with a lot of logistics and hurdles and other demands that when we have a lack of land resources, it makes it very challenging to work with the grocery store. Not to mention, overall, the Eastport Peninsula is very low density in comparison to more urbanized areas where there's more households and rooftops to support a large format grocery store. So we're trying to think strategically about how to get that food service in there. And of course, when we work with the development team, we'll have to work with their programming and strategies and how to incorporate in the building financially too.
Ideally, that kind of complements, if there's a Walgreens, at the shopping, there's something that complements that, so it's, but yeah, it has to fit in. The size has to make sense for them. Sorry, just wanted to interject.
I saw a question about zoning. I don't have a slide here about zoning. We clearly will identify those strategies, or I should say, things that may need to be modified in the zoning ordinance, but we are using the zoning as a guide at this point to make it, we all want to make this as what they would call a by right kind of situation where we can proceed forward with as few hurdles as possible, but it's never easy to do. So again, we're using the zoning code and all the regulations that apply to help guide this process. We will not be using the zoning code at the design shred because we want to make this about big ideas. We'll let the neighborhood and the residents come in with the big ideas. We'll take that back after the design shred, and we'll have the due diligence of letting you know that your big idea may need some modifications. But we'll worry about the details. You give us the big idea and we'll solve.
Alderman Gay.
Thanks. Maggie, there was a smaller, like family-owned grocery store that you had shown me that had been in, I guess, the community for some time. It was run by a family, but they had integrated that into the new design. I think in one of the buildings that you had shown me that where it was like on the first floor, small family-owned, and it had survived in that community for some time. Is that the idea? And also just as it relates to the zoning, once you get to the larger project, I definitely would support, the bigger ideas and maximizing potential for the benefit of HACA. I think as some sort of retail on site would be absolutely great, because then they could, possibly benefit from that ground rent or something like that. So just all really good ideas.
And we can use this this master planning process to, and Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but to help guide the comprehensive plan and identifying any kind of map change that would be needed for zoning too. So I think we might be slightly ahead of the comprehensive plan. So there's a little bit of informing of each other in this process.
Yeah, and I want to also say that our code also provides some greater flexibility when you do a plan development, which is to say, you work more closely with the city on what your goals are, and you can do certain things to sort of go beyond your zoning, but there may be ways to change what we have today to make for a better project. But yeah.
And I just wanted to respond to Alderman Gay that, yeah, there were a couple things that we saw, but one of them I think that you're referencing was definitely ground floor retail that was built into a multi-story. I think it was like a 4-story building. You would never notice because it blended into the community, but there were some ground floor retail. There were some Black-owned businesses that had that were using that space, and you definitely underwrite part of the cost of the rent as part of the financing of the building in order to encourage that. So that's definitely things that we can consider.
I just want to respond to some of the notes here. The bodega, thank you, Karen. That's the word maybe that Maggie and I were scrambling to bring out. The small format kind of grocery store. You see that
it's a corner store in New Orleans, so I understand. I don't know bodega, but it would be a corner store here in New Orleans.
Right. And then there was a comment about the Head Start programming. Before and after school programming. So for kids in elementary school and up, they would have a place after school to go. I think that's how some of those early education facilities work. It's not just catered to preschool ages, but also trying to accommodate some older kids and their needs as well. And so the program that we have there kind of supports that kind of modeling at the time. Does the plan assume building out the HACA-owned part of Hawkins Cove? I think my earlier comments about one of the design principles about respecting those environmental features. I think that if we align ourselves to that principle and people agree to that principle, then I think we will try to avoid building in that area. But again, come to the design charrette you can put your thumb on that if that's important to you, and help define maybe limits of disturbance, as they say, in that area. So I think that's an opportunity to look at.
Matthew, there was one more question from Franklin Baker that I wanted to answer about, have organizations already been pre-selected or given soft promises for the services noted? I would say that's no, but that's something that we're in the process of doing, with the exception of Early Head Start and Head Start that is operated by the YMCA there in Maryland. But please come, we don't have it scheduled yet, but we're in the process of identifying service providers and partners through our People and Supportive Services Task Force. Any ideas, we sort of are open to seeing who is interested in partnering. And Ray, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to add to that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, as we move forward with this concept plan, we absolutely want to be identifying operating partners for any of these mixed use, the non-residential spaces, because we don't want to be laying out a strategy where there is not a dedicated operator for spaces, because it will absolutely impact the financing strategy. So we are expecting to have commitments from operators of any non-residential spaces, ideally. If not, we really need to be thinking about flipping opportunities to more flexible spaces that might be adaptable, because one of the guiding principles here is that we need to have a plan that can move to implementation fairly quickly after the planning period is over, so that HACA is not, in limbo for years trying to figure out how to implement this plan. This is why we are looking to bring on a developer partner early next year. That's all part of the getting ready for implementation. So reality check on all of these ideas that are coming in: market viability, financial viability, and can get done.
Jane has had her hand up for a bit, so I want to I know we're at 8 o'clock, but go ahead, Jane. Up here on mute still.
Ray, maybe you can't answer this, and I understand, but it strikes me every time I come to one of these meetings, you're trying to build the airplane as it gets in the air. I don't mean that pejoratively. It's just the fact of the matter. It's a very complicated thing. So I'm just wondering, the design charrette is designed, you won't know on November 21st what kind of density you have to have on President Street, right? So the design charrette is more, not theoretical, but like, when will you know if you have like satellite areas to put density? What's your cutoff date for knowing?
So right now, Jane, we've got numbers that we're trying to solve for. So we know that right now, because we are backing into a program that is minimally going to allow the housing authority to compete for the federal dollars. And that has hard parameters. So we know what that is. So we have to solve for that, plus solve for these amenities. So we've heard we want neighborhood serving retail. We've heard we need Head Start. We've heard we need all of those additional things, and we have to park it. So we are trying to solve for that right now on the footprint that we have, which one of the questions was about zoning, for example. And there are some challenges on the site right now as a by right strategy. So we are simultaneously trying to figure out how to solve this problem on the housing authority owned property only, because if nothing else comes into play, we've got to figure that out. Simultaneously, we are working quite aggressively to try to figure out, can we identify and bring in additional development opportunity sites or partnerships? So when we get to the design workshop, Jane, that workshop is focusing on, if nothing else comes into play, how can we get comfortable as a community with that density scenario, right? How could we think about different design solutions that give us all of the things that people have said they want? neighborhood serving retail, diverse housing types, and so on and so forth. So it's a multiplicity of things that we're testing simultaneously, but we know the math problem we're trying to solve. And by the time we get to June of next year, that all needs to settle. Because when we go forward with our plan to HUD, we'll need to sort of lay out, here is how we will be developing the site. Here are the neighborhood opportunities that we will be focusing on. And to the extent that we have identified and locked in offsite development opportunities, we will also state that as well. So all of that becomes part of the programming that gets baked into the plan itself.
Well, my hat's off to you because that's a very helpful answer. Basically, you're trying to build 2 planes.
Because
Maybe 3.
No. It's one plane.
What you're saying is you have to have an A and a B. And
But we have to have an A and a B because the A is $50 million requires us to do X. The B is, if $50 million doesn't work, HACA still has to redevelop that site, right?
Right.
So we have to
in order to use choice neighborhood, it has to develop in a certain way.
Exactly.
So you've got to be able to fit it all there.
Yes.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for the question.
Melissa,
Just real quick. I think it's always a helpful reminder for everyone to understand that the type of project that we are trying to do will be more than $50 million.
Oh,
so the reason why we're asking HUD for 50 million because we may need 100 million or plus or 200 or
500
or 500 depending on all the wonderful things we want included in this project. And so as we're coming up with our wish, I just want to give that context because I think we've said the 50 million so many times. I think people think that that's it, but we want to show HUD we have this huge project we're about to embark on. We would like for you to invest in 50 million in this. And then here are all the other elements of the funding that we plan to pursue and bring to the table, which is why it's important now for us to get all the local folks, local investors, state, everyone involved in this. So the more concrete and realistic and reasonable plan we come up with, the more successful we're going to be in getting those funds. But I just wanted to help everyone just to say that, and we'll have to say that over and over again. But this is a major project, which is why we're asking HUD for 50 million. That's all.
And if Melissa, if we could just add one additional thing, is that while many variables might be in play, one of the variables that will never change is the commitment to the 1-for-1 replacement. So regardless of what happens, there will be no net loss of affordable units that are here today. And so nobody should be vague about that. We're trying to deliver a mixed income community plus a mixed use community, but if something has to give, it will not be the replacement units.
This is probably not for tonight, but Ray and Melissa, I think it'd be helpful to let people know what a funding cake looks like. You know, how many different layers there are. That was shocking to me when just the Newtown funding cake, and the amount of layers that have to be knit together to get to the total cost for redevelopment. And that was small compared to this. So.
Right. Very good point.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying, and with this project, I mean, everybody's going to sort of see how things are done. You know, I mean, I think a lot of people are accustomed to seeing a project from a developer come our way and it's like fully formed, and you know, that's not what we're doing here. I mean, it's the opposite. We're really trying to figure this thing out from the beginning. So I'm really happy to hear all the conversation and I'm really excited about this November 21st event. I think it's going to be, I think it's been a great one. I think the activities that are being planned will really engage folks and help us to ask the right questions and see what things might look like on the site, so we can start to visualize the scenarios. And so I hope you all can make that. There'll be some, it'll be in the evening, I should say. I think 6:30 to 8 p.m. is what we're looking at Eastport United again. And I'll send a calendar invite, but
And Eric, I would also make a plug for all of our friends on tonight's meeting. If you have a neighbor or you know somebody who wishes to participate and they haven't heard about it, this is an open meeting. Bring them, okay? So this is not closed. The expectation is we'll leave this meeting with some sense about the direction of the physical plan, and whether or not there is any consensus around how we solve this density challenge, which should be very interesting. So looking forward to it. And lastly, Eric, I know we ran out of time, but I do want to make one last thing: schedule. We had a great conversation about the early action activities, but I'm going to be pressing. We have to wrap it end of the month, because we have to turn these fabulous ideas into actual proposals that actually get submitted to HUD. So really, this is the month to wrap that final list up, so that we can get to the next phase. And I think something just popped up about the design workshop. Yes, that's in person.
So
Eastport United Methodist Church, 6:30, November 21st.
So we might be possibly sending some information out to the group, try to, share some specifics on the early action activities to maybe get some people to chime in before we can meet again, which probably won't be till early December. That might be something we'll have to do. But we'll take what we heard tonight and try to just refine some of the ideas for the early action activities that we can share with. All right. Well, thanks as always to everybody who came, and hope you'll stay engaged in this project and bring others. This is a very intentionally open, inclusive group. So, please keep that in mind, and we appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you on the 21st, and be in touch if you got any questions in the meantime. So, thanks.
Thanks for all your work.